The moment I saw Karen leap the HOA pool gate in a sequined swimsuit, bolt cutters swinging in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other, I knew we had entered a new level of suburban madness. It wasn't the first time she'd broken the rules. Far from it, but this time, she wasn't sneaking in quietly. She strutted in like she owned the place, sliced the padlock clean in front of her guests, and yelled, "Welcome to freedom, darlings!" as if she'd just liberated a country. I stood across the street with my pool testing kit in hand, watching 30 strangers pour into the pool area with lawn chairs, music speakers, and catered sushi trays. I wasn't just mad, I was stunned. I had told the HOA. I had warned them she'd try something again. But they brushed it off like it was just a misunderstanding. Now, there she was, dancing on the pool deck with a wine spritzer while neon floaties hit the water like confetti, and I had one very slippery, very satisfying idea brewing in my mind. It all started a few weeks earlier when I moved into Ridgewater Springs, a gated community that promised peace, quiet, and shared amenities like a tennis court and a gorgeous pool. I'm an engineer by trade, and the pool fascinated me more than I expected. The filtration system, the temperature regulators, the precision in chlorine balance, it was a technical marvel tucked behind a white picket fence. So when the HOA invited volunteers to help maintain it, I jumped on board. Not only did I get key access to check on the chemicals and systems every weekend, but I also got to know my neighbors and earn their trust. Most people respected the rules. Reserve the space, sign the waiver, return the key. It was simple. But then there was Karen. She lived 3 houses down, in a peach-colored house with a marble fountain in her front yard that never actually worked. Her car had a bumper sticker that said, "I don't call 911, I call the manager." You couldn't miss her. She wore oversized sunglasses even at night, made loud phone calls in the community garden, and treated every rule as a suggestion. Her specialty? Unauthorized pool parties. She called them community wellness events, but really they were just wine-soaked socials with 20 guests, no reservations, and a trail of glitter in their wake. The first time I caught her hosting one, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a scheduling error. Maybe she just didn't know. I approached politely, reminded her of the booking system, and offered to help her get set up next time. She looked me up and down, sipped her mimosa, and said, "Don't worry about it, sweetie. We're just harmless little fish." Then she laughed like she had just made a brilliant joke. I reported it to the HOA, but the only response I got was a canned email thanking me for my concern. The second time was worse. She cut the lock clean off and replaced it with one of her own. When I arrived to do the chemical testing that Sunday morning, I couldn't even get in. I had to climb the fence and explain myself to a crowd of irritated strangers who treated me like the party crasher. Karen smirked the whole time. "It's just chlorine, pool guy. Relax." That time, I sent photos and timestamps to the HOA board. They thanked me again. Nothing changed. That brings us back to the most recent Saturday, the breaking point. This time, Karen didn't even try to hide what she was doing. She blasted music that echoed across the block, threw open the gate like a red carpet entrance, and started pouring rose into mason jars before the first guest could even sit down. I stood across the street, pool kit in hand, jaw clenched. She had crossed the line. Not just for me, but for every rule-following neighbor who had to suffer her entitlement. I walked over, trying once more to reason with her. "Karen, you didn't book this. You're not authorized to be here. You're damaging HOA property." She looked at me like I was a houseplant that had started talking. "Oh, Leo, you're so dramatic. It's water. No one owns water. That padlock was HOA issued." She giggled and waved it off. "I'll replace it with a better one. They should thank me." Before I could say another word, one of her friends took my photo and asked Karen, "Is this the creepy guy you warned us about?" That was when I knew logic wasn't going to work. Karen had rewritten the narrative and made herself the hero. I wasn't going to win this battle with words or emails. I needed a plan. something scientific, something poetic, something unforgettable. That evening, I sat in my garage staring at a gallon of water-soluble polymer slime I had created months ago for a kid's birthday experiment. It was safe, biodegradable, and nearly invisible when mixed into water, until it reacted with heat and movement. Then it clung to fabrics, turning neon green or purple, depending on pH levels and exposure time. I had created it to show kids how molecules interact with hydrophobic fibers. But now it had a higher purpose. I began modifying the recipe. I added a time delay, adjusted the density, and introduced just enough pigment to ensure a glorious transformation once it reacted. I was turning the pool into a science project, and Karen was going to be the test subject. I knew her pattern. She always showed up on Saturdays around midday. I spent Friday night prepping the pool, deactivating the chlorine for safety and pouring in my custom mix after hours. I wore gloves, checked the temperature levels, ensured nothing would stain or harm the lining. It would only cling to clothing, not skin, and the colors would take about 10 minutes to fully show. That was all I needed. The next morning, I installed a dummy lock to make it look like security was intact, then sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. By 12:07 p.m., I heard Karen's unmistakable voice. "Cut it, Margie. We're not waiting on bureaucracy today." Within minutes, they were inside, drinks clinking, music pumping. I could see everything from my upstairs window. The first signs were subtle: slight discomfort, guests tugging at their swimsuits, wondering why the fabric felt weird. Then came the color. Bright, unmistakable patches blooming across their backs, their shorts, their stomach. Karen looked down, saw her elegant white cover-up shifting into a patchy mess of green and violet, and screamed. I sipped my coffee as the chaos unfolded. Phones came out. Someone yelled about being chemically attacked. Another woman threw her purse in the hot tub trying to escape the slime. Karen pointed at the sky like it had rained dye. I didn't need to post anything. The internet would do the rest. But deep down, it wasn't just about slime. It was about respect, about being ignored for too long, about every neighbor who got kicked out of their pool slot because Karen wanted to sip sangria with her influencer friends. It was about consequences. And as the screams echoed across the block and Karen's party fled like rats from a sinking ship, I realized something incredible. This wasn't revenge. This was justice in the form of goo. And it was just the beginning. When the last of Karen's guests fled the pool like they were being chased by invisible jellyfish, I knew the slime had done its job. The streaks of green and purple clinging to their expensive cover-ups and swimsuits had taken on a life of their own, turning a posh suburban gathering into a slapstick comedy sketch. But while the spectacle was satisfying, I also knew it would lead to more than a few angry emails, maybe even a meeting with the HOA board. That didn't scare me. In fact, it motivated me to get ahead of the chaos and document every detail, just in case Karen decided to twist the story again and paint herself as the victim. And knowing her, she would. I spent the rest of that Saturday afternoon cleaning up my garage, wiping down the equipment I had used to prepare the slime mixture, and organizing the footage from my discreetly placed camera near the pool entrance. It had caught everything from the moment she snipped the lock to the exact second she realized something was wrong with her clothes. There was no yelling, no accusations, no one pushing her into the water. Just Karen walking straight into a prank of her own making. It was important to me that no one could accuse me of physical tampering or causing any damage to people or property. All I had done was introduce a harmless chemical agent to the pool that reacted only to fabrics, and let nature and Karen's entitlement do the rest. The next morning, as expected, I woke up to a string of angry messages in the HOA WhatsApp group. Karen had posted a long rant about a chemical terrorist targeting community members. She claimed someone had booby-trapped the pool to hurt her and her guests and demanded an emergency investigation. One neighbor asked if the pool was still safe, while another, bless her soul, asked if Karen had even been authorized to be there in the first place. Karen avoided answering that. Instead, she doubled down on the drama, saying she had been assaulted with a foreign substance, and that someone's going to jail for this. I almost choked on my cereal. By noon, the HOA president, a man named Glenn who treated the job like he was managing national security, had emailed all residents saying the pool would be closed temporarily while they investigated the incident. That gave me the perfect window to properly clean the pool and reset all the chemical balances. I volunteered, of course, and nobody objected. Glenn, who wasn't exactly a fan of Karen either, met me at the pool gate, shaking his head like a man who had seen too many summers ruined by too few people. "Leo, just tell me what the hell happened." I showed him the footage. The lock being cut, the illegal party, Karen doing a high kick into the shallow end. Then I explained my concoction, step by step. Safe, non-toxic, temperature-activated, designed not to harm the pool or the people. Glenn listened quietly, nodding more than I expected. When I finished, he chuckled. "You know, it's not official policy, but I can't say she didn't have it coming." He helped me drain a portion of the water, run fresh cycles through the filtration system, and scrub down the hot tub area where most of the slime residue had clung to the tile edges. I took extra care with the cleaning agents, making sure nothing lingered. The goal wasn't sabotage. It was a wake-up call. And as I worked, I thought more and more about how I had ended up here, just a guy trying to keep a community pool clean, suddenly forced to engineer petty justice to get anyone to listen. Karen's next move, unfortunately, came fast. By Monday, she had escalated her accusations. She filed an official complaint with the HOA, accusing me of harassment, chemical warfare, and psychological trauma. She even attached pictures of her friend's ruined swimwear, as if that was concrete evidence of a crime. One photo showed her friend Brenda with a purple handprint across her back, looking like she'd lost a paintball mat. Another showed Karen holding her ruined kaftan like it was evidence in a murder case. I couldn't believe it. She had actually dragged her laundry into a professional complaint. But Glenn wasn't born yesterday. He called a formal meeting with the HOA board, invited both Karen and me, and made sure it was recorded for transparency. The moment I walked in, Karen was already seated with a folder thick enough to look like a legal dossier. Her arms were crossed, her lips tight, her whole body buzzing with indignation. "There he is," she said as soon as I entered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "The man who tried to destroy my life over a key." I kept my cool and handed Glenn a USB drive containing the video footage, the chemical composition of the slime, and a full breakdown of how it worked. I even brought a bottle of the substance, sealed and labeled. Karen recoiled like it was radioactive. "He brought it here? Are you trying to attack me again?" Glenn calmly inserted the drive into his laptop and projected the footage onto the conference room screen. The silence in the room was beautiful. Karen's voice rang out over the speakers as she ordered her friend to cut the lock. Her laugh echoed as she told her guests to jump in before the snitch shows up. Then the moment of realization, her shouting about slime, waving her arms, her guests flailing around in a whirlpool of goo. Some of the board members chuckled. One even covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Karen's face flushed red. When the video ended, Glenn turned to Karen and asked, "Were you aware that the pool was not reserved under your name for this event?" Karen stammered, backpedaling into her usual excuses. "Well, the system was down. And I told Mindy, my cousin, about it. She used to be on the board. I thought it would be fine. Mindy resigned 4 months ago," Glenn said flatly. "And the booking system hasn't gone down once this season. We track every request." Karen went silent. Her folder sat unopened in front of her. Glenn turned to me. "Leo, based on what I've seen and the reports from other residents, it's clear that Karen accessed the pool without permission, violated multiple HOA policies, and endangered others by bringing unauthorized guests. Your actions, while unconventional, caused no harm and were in response to repeated rule-breaking that had gone unchecked. Karen gasped. "You're siding with him?" "No," Glenn said. "I'm siding with the facts." The board voted unanimously to issue Karen a formal warning and suspend her access to all communal facilities for 3 months. If she violated the suspension, she would face fines and potential legal action. Karen stormed out of the room, shouting about unfair treatment and conspiracies. I sat back in my chair, not smug, not proud, just relieved. That evening, the neighborhood was unusually calm. The pool gate stood untouched. The water sparkled. A couple of kids waved at me as I walked by. One of them said, "Hey, are you the guy who turned the pool into a paint factory?" I smiled and waved it off. "It's just science, kid." But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to disappear quietly. She'd come back with something bigger, louder, more ridiculous. And when she did, I'd be ready, with facts, footage, and maybe, if necessary, a little more slime. For the next few days after the hearing, the neighborhood remained unusually quiet. People still talked about the incident, of course. Whispers at mailboxes, chuckles in driveways, and the occasional, "Hey, weren't you the guy who," as I walked by. But for the most part, the chaos had died down. The pool was back to normal. The water was balanced, clean, and calm again. Families returned with their kids, young couples floated lazily under the sun, and not once did I spot an uninvited party guest or hear Sinatra echoing off the stone pavers. It almost felt too peaceful. That's how I knew Karen was up to something. She had gone completely dark since the HOA meeting. No complaints in the group chat. No rants on her Facebook community page. No passive-aggressive signs in her yard. For a woman who thrived on attention, that kind of silence was its own red flag. Then on Thursday, the silence cracked. Glenn forwarded me an email Karen had sent to the board. It was 8 paragraphs long and written like a courtroom drama. She accused me of running an unauthorized chemical experiment, claimed it was premeditated assault, and even suggested that I had altered pool maintenance records to set her up. She provided no evidence, but the sheer drama of her words made it clear she was gearing up for a second wave, not through direct confrontation this time, but through manipulation and pity. She followed the email by posting a carefully curated slideshow on her social media. It featured pictures of stained swimsuits, blurry videos of the chaos, and a voiceover of her narrating the trauma she experienced that day. She called it, "The Day My Community Turned Against Me." I watched the whole thing with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Karen was truly committed to rewriting history. In one scene, she showed a close-up of her patio, dramatically stating, "This is where I cried after being attacked with foreign slime." She even inserted background music, slow piano, to sell the emotion. That would have been hilarious enough, but then she doubled down and began telling neighbors she was preparing to press charges. According to Mrs. Henderson from across the street, Karen had consulted a lawyer. She claimed to be pursuing a civil suit against the HOA and me personally for public humiliation, material damages, and emotional distress. The lawyer's name she gave, Marcus Brenton, was real, but he was a family attorney who mostly handled divorces and wills. Still, it was enough to cause a ripple of concern among the board. Glenn asked to meet again. This time, it was a smaller meeting, just him, me, and Janice, the treasurer. We met in the clubhouse conference room over coffee. Glenn looked tired. "Look, Leo, I believe you. Everyone on the board does. But Karen's not letting this go. She's claiming defamation now, and she's harassing neighbors with flyers about the pool incident. She even put one on my windshield. We need to be smart about this." I nodded, already expecting this escalation. "I have more footage," I said. "Not just from that day, but from previous times she broke in. If she wants to take it legal, she's going to be up against a wall of evidence." Janice leaned in. "What kind of footage are we talking about?" I pulled out my tablet and showed them video clip. Karen cutting a lock weeks prior. Her yelling at a lifeguard during a community swim hour. Her sneaking in guests through the side gate. Glenn and Janice both shook their heads in disbelief. She's been running this place like her personal resort, Glenn muttered. But while the HOA was getting fed up, Karen's antics weren't stopping. She began manipulating new neighbors, people who hadn't been around long enough to know her history. She invited them for wine tastings, gifted them homemade cookies with little cards saying, "Sorry you've had to witness the drama," and painted herself as the victim of a vindictive, power-hungry neighbor with a lab coat. She even told someone I had a military background in chemical weapons, which couldn't have been further from the truth. I build wastewater management systems for a living. The most dangerous thing I'd ever handled was a backed-up toilet valve. Then came the moment that made it all crystal clear. One evening, I came home to find a letter taped to my front door. It was written in cursive on lavender stationery and signed, from a friend of the community. The message claimed I should stop my crusade and make amends before things got worse. At the bottom, in tiny print, was a line that read, "Let the pool be for everyone. Even you." I knew Karen had written it. The tone was hers, right down to the oddly maternal threat. I took a photo, documented it, and decided that it was time to go on the offense. Not with another prank, but with public truth. I put together a presentation. Nothing dramatic, just a clear, chronological series of events backed with images, dates, HOA rulebook screenshots, and resident testimonies. Then I requested time to speak at the monthly HOA community meeting, open to all residents. Glenn approved it. The night of the meeting, I stood in front of 30 people in the clubhouse rec room and calmly laid out the truth. No jokes, no slime jokes, no bitterness. Just the facts. I showed the footage of the unauthorized parties, the lock cutting, the shouting. I read the messages I had sent to the HOA long before the slime ever entered the conversation. I explained how I had created the mixture and why it was safe. I included scientific documents, safety reports, and even a breakdown of how I rebalanced the pool afterward. Then I let the room sit in silence for a moment. Karen was in the back. She tried to interrupt once, but Glenn raised a hand and told her to wait her turn. After I finished, Karen stood up and said, "This is all a smear campaign. He's obsessed with me. Why else would he record me this much?" Her voice cracked, but the room didn't sympathize. They'd seen the truth laid out too clearly. A woman named Darlene spoke up. "Karen, we've all seen what you've done to this neighborhood. I saw you cut that lock. Don't act like you're the victim now." Then came more. Mr. Nguyen said she'd tried to bribe him with wine to lie about the slime. The Johnsons said she used their backyard hose to fill up kiddie pools without asking. The floodgates opened. Karen realized it too late. The room had turned on her. She stormed out halfway through the meeting, but not before shouting, "This isn't over. I have rights." Glenn looked at me and said quietly, "She's not going to stop." I agreed. But that night, as I walked home, something had shifted. The neighbors were no longer on the fence. They had seen through her. They had spoken up. And now I wasn't just the guy with the slime. I was the guy who reminded the neighborhood what boundaries actually meant. Still, I knew Karen. This wasn't the end of her campaign. She would try again. Something louder. Something more ridiculous. And whatever it was, I'd be ready for it. Because now the neighborhood was, too. The following week began with an odd sense of stillness in the neighborhood, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence you feel right before a thunderstorm rolls in. Everyone knew Karen hadn't taken her public embarrassment lightly. After the HOA meeting fallout, she had vanished for 2 days, which was concerning in itself. No social media posts, no front yard drama, no gossiping by the mailbox. People said she was licking her wounds, but I had a different theory. Karen wasn't licking anything. She was plotting. And sure enough, by Wednesday, the next phase of her chaos unfolded with the flair of a reality show villain staging a comeback. That morning, brightly colored flyers appeared in every mailbox on the block. They were glossy, double-sided, and designed like political attack ad. The headline in bold red said, Is our HOA being run by a bully? Underneath it was a caricature of me. Yes, someone had actually drawn me, with beakers in both hands, wearing a villain's grin, standing next to a cartoon pool filled with toxic goo. Below that were bullet points listing my so-called offenses, including chemical attacks, abuse of power, and manipulation of HOA procedures for personal revenge. It read like a manifesto. At the bottom was Karen's name in small print with a call to action. Demand accountability. Join Karen this Saturday for a peaceful poolside protest. The neighborhood erupted with laughter and disbelief. Some people brought the flyers to me and asked if they could keep them as souvenirs. Others took pictures and posted them online, adding hashtags like #SlimeGate and #KarenGoesPolitical. One even got turned into a meme featuring the caption, "Coming this summer, Pool Wars Episode 2. But despite the humor, the message behind the flyers was clear. Karen was trying to rally a movement. She didn't want to just fight me. She wanted to flip the entire narrative, cast herself as the brave whistleblower, and convince the neighborhood that I was the real problem. At first, I considered ignoring it. Let her protest. Let her talk. I had the support of the HOA board, the footage, and the facts. But then a few neighbors told me Karen had started visiting homes, especially the newer residents who hadn't been around long enough to witness her behavior firsthand. She knocked on doors, spoke softly, handed out cookies, and shared carefully edited clips from the slime incident that made her look like she had been targeted for no reason. One woman, recently moved from out of state, came to me genuinely concerned. She said, "You're conducting experiments with chemicals that aren't approved by the city," she told me. Is any of that true? I clarified everything, but I realized Karen's campaign was gaining more traction than I anticipated. Not because people believed her entirely, but because people love drama. And Karen knew exactly how to dish it out. Saturday arrived with more tension than usual. At 10 in the morning, Karen set up her so-called protest near the pool gate. She brought a folding table, handmade signs, lemonade, and, unbelievably, a karaoke machine. There were 6 lawn chairs, most of them filled with her usual circle of wine moms and gossip veterans. They wore matching shirts that read "Justice for All" and occasionally chanted vague slogans like "End HOA Tyranny" and "Bring Back Community Joy." I watched from a distance, sipping coffee on my porch. Honestly, it would have been funny if it hadn't been so surreal. A karaoke protest with lemonade and laminated signs about chemical tyranny? It felt like a suburban fever dream. But then things took a more serious turn. Around noon, Karen and her followers walked up to the pool gate and clipped a large red banner across it that read, "Closed by public demand." They chained the entrance with a padlock, one that wasn't HOA approved, and posted flyers around the fence saying the pool was under citizen protest until the board addressed public grievances. That was it. She wasn't just making noise anymore. She was obstructing access to HOA property. That crossed a very real line. I called Glenn, who was already on his way. When he arrived and saw the chain on the gate, his face tightened. "This is vandalism," he said flatly. He tried to talk to Karen calmly, asking her to remove the banner and the lock. She refused, claiming she was exercising community rights, and that the lock was symbolic. When he pointed out that, symbolic or not, it was physically blocking residents from accessing the pool, she shrugged and said, "That's the whole point." Glenn immediately called the HOA attorney and local authorities, and when the sheriff's deputy pulled up 10 minutes later, Karen's face went pale. To her credit, she tried to argue. She talked fast, flailed her arms, mentioned trauma and slime and neighborhood injustice. The deputy listened politely, then asked her if she had official permission to modify HOA property. When she said, "Not yet," he asked her to step aside while the lock was removed. Karen demanded he write up a statement documenting her citizen protest. He nodded, said he'd include her side in the incident report, and handed Glenn the bolt cutters. The lock was snipped. The banner came down. And just like that, Karen's big moment unraveled. She didn't leave right away. She sat at her protest table in silence while her friends gradually slipped away, some pretending they had urgent errands, others just walking off without a word. Within an hour, it was just Karen and her karaoke machine, quietly playing an instrumental of My Heart Will Go On. I don't know if it was meant to be ironic or if the playlist had just been on shuffle, but it was oddly fitting. The protest that was supposed to rally the neighborhood had become a sad solo performance to no one. The next day, the HOA board sent out an official notice. It summarized the events, reiterated the policies, and reminded all residents that any unauthorized modification to communal property would result in fines or suspension. Karen was fined $500 and given a formal warning. If she committed one more offense, her HOA privileges would be revoked for a full year, including access to all amenities and voting right. Despite everything, Karen didn't stop. On Monday, she filed a grievance with the city zoning board, claiming the pool violated environmental codes because of unknown chemical dumping. It was a desperate move, and it backfired almost immediately when the city inspector came by, tested the water, and found everything well within regulation. He even complimented the filtration system I had helped upgrade. Karen was forced to sign a document acknowledging the inspection result. I had never seen her look more defeated. But even then, she refused to apologize. She told a neighbor she was just waiting for the right moment to take things to the next level. That's when I knew she wasn't done, not even close. Karen didn't know how to lose. She didn't care about rules or community. She cared about control, and she'd keep trying until something finally stopped her cold. What she didn't know was that the neighborhood was already turning. People who once tolerated her for the sake of peace were now openly mocking her antics. A few teens chalked "Slime Queen" in front of her driveway one night. Someone made stickers of the pool cartoon from her flyer and handed them out at the HOA clubhouse. The community was tired. Not just of Karen, but of letting her dominate the narrative. Karen didn't show her face in public for a few days after her so-called protest fizzled into a karaoke solo. It was like she had momentarily disappeared into her lair, plotting and licking the wounds no one else believed she had. But the damage to her reputation had already spiraled beyond repair, and the neighborhood had reached a collective point of no return. People weren't just annoyed with her anymore. They were fed up. Years of her entitlement, her manipulation, her backhanded flyers and door-to-door guilt trips had finally run their course. You could feel the shift in the air. No one was scared of Karen anymore. No one was interested in staying quiet just to keep things civil. They wanted change, and now they were organizing for it. The first sign of resistance came from the most unexpected place. Janet, the retired schoolteacher who lived next door to Karen. For years, she had kept her head down and politely avoided drama. But one morning, she pinned a laminated sign on her yard that read in bold letters, "Pool rules matter." Underneath that was a hand-drawn image of a wine glass with a red circle through it and the words "No parties, no padlocks, no Karens." It was subtle, but it sent a clear message. A few other neighbors followed suit. Small signs started appearing in flower beds, on garage doors, even etched in chalk on the sidewalk. One teenager painted "Respect the Chlorine" on his fence and got a round of applause from passing joggers. Karen must have noticed. She began walking her dog at odd hours, wearing large sunglasses and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her once daily rants in the group chat dwindled into silence. But she was still trying behind the scenes. One neighbor, Sasha, told me that Karen had offered to donate to the HOA in exchange for a reset of her standing. Glenn, who had grown increasingly tired of Karen's antics, politely declined and documented the attempt. When Sasha refused to join her cause, Karen snapped, calling her a sheep and accusing her of being brainwashed by that pool scientist. That label stuck harder than she intended, because by the next week, people were referring to me jokingly as the Chlorine Whisperer. With the board's approval, I helped launch a neighborhood feedback survey to review community concerns and revise HOA procedures. We called it the Summer of Clarity Initiative. The response was overwhelming. People didn't just fill it out, they added detailed complaints, screenshots of past incidents, and personal stories about how Karen had harassed, bullied, or manipulated them over the years. There were accounts of her yelling at kids for splashing too much, shaming elderly residents for hogging pool chairs, and even threatening to report someone to animal control because their dog barked during one of her yoga sessions. Glenn compiled the responses and brought them into the next board meeting. The stack of papers was nearly 2 inches thick. During that meeting, the board voted unanimously to move forward with an enforcement clause that would allow suspension of HOA privileges for any resident who accumulated 3 verified community violations within a 6-month period. Karen already had 2. When the policy went live, it was accompanied by a public report outlining recent rule infractions, and Karen's name appeared at the top. She was livid. She called the board biased, said the system was corrupt, and then attempted one final Hail Mary, a pool party redemption tour. That Saturday, an email hit the neighborhood inbox with the subject line, Healing Waters Social. It was from Karen, and the message was written like a press release. She claimed to have found peace and wanted to reconnect with the community through an inclusive event focused on forgiveness and summer joy. The location? The HOA pool. The date? That evening. No approval. No booking. No permission. At this point, I didn't even need to intervene. Residents themselves began forwarding the email with sarcastic remark. Someone replied all with, "Do we bring our own slime or is it provided?" Glenn, already prepared for nonsense, called a brief emergency board meeting. They agreed to post 2 off-duty officers by the pool that evening, not to arrest anyone, but to maintain order and document any violations. Karen arrived for her event around 6, dressed in another white summer cover-up with gold bangles and a Bluetooth speaker clipped to her belt. She had about 5 guests, including the usual faces from her protest crew. They marched up to the pool gate, only to find it chained and locked with a printed sign that read "Pool closed for unauthorized activity review." When she saw the officers nearby, Karen froze. One officer approached calmly and said, "Ma'am, you were made aware earlier that this facility is currently off-limits for unapproved events. You've been warned. Any attempt to access it now would constitute trespassing." Karen's face twitched, and for a second I thought she might actually scream. But then she smiled, turned to her friends, and said, "I guess they're scared of healing." She walked off without making a scene, but the message was clear. She had lost. The neighborhood had turned her circus into a sideshow, and now she was running out of space to perform. Over the next week, the ripple effect of that final attempt spread far and wide. Residents began suggesting new bylaws for public voting. One proposed a clause banning anyone from hosting events without prior authorization for 12 months if they had ever broken into HOA property. Another suggested allowing residents to elect a rotating oversight committee that could temporarily suspend any board member who showed bias or failed to enforce policy. The suggestions poured in, and every one of them carried the same undertone: we are done letting one person control the narrative. I stayed out of the spotlight. I didn't need credit. I just wanted the community to be functional again. But neighbors kept showing appreciation. A couple of kids dropped off a handmade thank you card with googly eyes and glitter that said "Slime Hero." Mrs. Henderson baked me banana bread with a note that read "Thanks for standing up." It was weirdly emotional. I never expected that a battle over pool access would turn into a neighborhood awakening, but somehow, that's exactly what happened. The real final twist came when I saw Karen one last time about 2 weeks later. It was early evening, and I was cleaning the pool filters before closing time. She walked by slowly, no sunglasses, no entourage, just her and her little dog. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me work. Then she asked, "Did you ever feel bad about what you did?" I looked up and said, "No, because it made people pay attention." You never listened when we used words. She stared for a moment, then nodded faintly. I don't think it was an apology. It wasn't even a truce. It was just an admission that something had changed. Maybe in her. Maybe just around her. But it was enough. That summer ended with more smiles than arguments. The pool stayed clean, the lock stayed intact, and the reservation system was respected. People played music at reasonable volumes. Kids splashed without being scolded. Neighbors waved again. And the only thing that clung to anyone's clothes was the faint memory of a day when slime did what policies couldn't. It brought the entire community together to finally say enough.